At Jewelers Mutual, we're a little obsessed with jewelry. Obsessed like auctioneers with talking fast.
50, we're going to
pop stars with auto-tune.
Yeah.
And dentists with asking questions.
So, how did he propose?
After they've put their hands in your mouth.
Great.
Yes, we've made jewelry our obsession for over 100 years. We love it so much we named our kids Ruby, Amber, and Opal.
Venti soy latte for Opal?
At Jewelers Mutual, we insure jewelry and only jewelry, which is why people who are also obsessed with jewelry trust us with theirs.
When some people die, you don't know what the impact's going to be. When Princess Diana died, for example, there was a huge emotional outpouring. These kinds of Elvis Presley in our culture. It turns out that this general we killed was a beloved hero of the Iranian people.
There you have it.
You can't make. You can't make this stuff up.
Princess Di and.
Elvis,
unbelievable. That's Chris Matthews, a man who used to be a rational thinking human being, an American patriot, no longer.
You know what I'm just thinking of, Bernie, honest to God, bringing up the past. Soleimani, Elvis, and and Princess Di?
Which doesn't belong in one?
Which doesn't belong in one? See, you know it. That's my boy.
Hey, listen, right now on the line, we'll work on that. On the line, we have with us a brilliant guy. He's the editor of the National Review. He writes for Politico. You see him all the time on Fox News, Meet the Press, George Stephanopoulos, et cetera, et cetera. And he's got a great column out this morning all about the president being an interventionist or an isolationist. But before we get to that, Rich Lowry, good morning to you.
Hey, how are you?
Very good. Thank you, Rich. You did write last week about Colin Kaepernick, which was a fantastic column.
He nailed it.
And since then, we have found out that the president was actually avenging the death of a brown American citizen. How about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's not as though the American Army and contractors are all white.
Exactly.
If you've ever been out with them, that's the opposite of the case. It's one of the most integrated institutions in American life, fully integrated. I mean, really, they're blood brothers, no matter what their race or ethnicity is. So Colin Kaepernick represents the most poisonous and extreme views of the left. And the idea that a highly successful American corporation makes that guy a brand manager and lets him be the arbiter of whether they'll have American flags on their shoes or not is crazy.
It's obscene.
Rich, Russ Salzberg here. Rich, let me ask you this. Everybody has differences of opinions, but it just enraged me this past week, and you've been covering this for a long time. Have you ever seen a more slanted view from the majority, the great, vast majority of the media than what has gone on the past week with this Iran business? Because to me, it was like everybody was pissed off, for lack of a better term, that we weren't at war.
Exactly. I mean, it's the same thing it's been the last 3 years. It hasn't gotten any better or worse. But this is a great example of it, of the total groupthink and the hostility to Trump distorting everyone's point of view. One, you should be really glad this guy was dead, right? Just at the opening. That's your opening bid. This guy has prodigious amounts of American blood on his hands, is an evil bastard. It's good that he's gone. And many people did not view it from that filter. Then they assumed there would just be this horrible war, and it must be a terrible blunder because Trump did it. And, of course, there are downside risks, and we didn't know quite how it would play out. But you're right. It was reminded me a little bit sometimes, when there's a Category 5 hurricane barreling down in the United States somewhere, and you got all the reporters in their rain slickers on the beach, windswept beach, and then the hurricane dissipates or moves off and doesn't hit the coast. You can feel this kind of sense of disappointment on TV. It didn't happen, and bizarrely, there was that aspect to this thing too. And it looks like it's a long-term game. We'll see how it plays out over time. But in the short term, it was clearly a tactical victory for Donald Trump. This was a ballsy move that paid off and appears to have deterred the Iranian regime and really staggered it, as we've seen in these anti-regime protests over the weekend.
Right, which barely got any coverage. And you have people like, let's say, Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper. They're all mourning for, and siding with the Jew-hating, gay-hating, America-hating, blood on their hands Iranians. As they're siding with them. I mean, is it not lost on them that if they were in those countries, they would not be allowed to survive? I mean, the Trump derangement syndrome is so real and so on display these days. It just boggles your mind.
Yeah, and then so Iran doesn't retaliate. So they give the Iranians credit. Oh, they're such rational actors. They calibrated so carefully. No, they were scared because this really set them back on their heels. They didn't think it was possible. They didn't think anyone would do it, which is why Soleimani could travel like he was a businessman staying at the Holiday Inn Express planning a terrorist attack in Baghdad before he flew back to Damascus or whatever. And Trump had the guts to hit him, and it was meant to send a message. It wasn't meant to start a war. We're going to occupy Iraq or Iran. But it was meant to send a message, and it appears that the message was received.
Well,
I'll be happy.
Rich, I'll tell you, you came out with a couple of lines. I'm just going to read it because it's real short, that I thought was just bang on the money. Trump's red line to Iran didn't have to do with our democratic values or the imperative to keep shipping lanes open for the sake of world order. It reflected the most basic imperative of a nation protecting its own. Don't harm Americans. I mean, that's as simple as, like, you want to talk about apple pie, that was as simple as it gets.
Yeah, and I mean, that was exactly clear what it was. Now, I think Trump should talk more about our values. I think they're a great weapon diplomatically in terms of our national message. I think the tweets he sent out over the weekend about the Iranian protesters were fantastic, and there should be more of that. But this is the basic kind of Jacksonian reflex that he represents. The real red line for everyone is don't harm Americans, and that's what's most important to him.
I mean, you can't America first. That's the Trump doctrine. Don't harm Americans when it comes to the Middle East, or else you're going to get it. And who could not be happy about that except people who are insane with hate? And speaking of which, you had some of the presidential candidates, Rich Lowry from the National Review. You had people like Pete Buttigieg echoing, actually repeating Iranian talking points and blaming Trump for, as did Joy Reid and others on TV, for the downing of that Iranian plane. I mean, it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, also insane, because the Iranians, they're launching this retaliation operation, shooting a bunch of missiles at our bases, calibrated not to hurt anyone, thankfully. And they should have shut down the airport in Tehran. And then, even if they didn't, they shouldn't have shot down an airliner that just had taken off from their own airport. And it's somehow that this Trump's responsible for this, or there's a quote unquote crossfire that the airliner was caught up in, which you saw a lot of on Twitter. Is absolutely, it's just mind-boggling. People have lost their minds. Even David Brooks of the New York Times, who's not a Trump fan, wrote a good column a couple days ago. It's just, we've become like him. The anti-Trump people, he's saying, have become like his view of Trump. Like, totally irrational and incapable of thought. They've been driven out of their minds. And
that's my next question, which is, does this affect the Democrat base? Anybody like David Brooks in the Democrat base, does this affect votes? Do they not experience an epiphany somehow or other after this latest chapter, even though they're being poisoned by some of the media, local and national media? Well,
kind of the walking, talking expression, like it or not, crazy or not, of that epiphany is Joe Biden, right? If they nominate Joe Biden, it's a sign that enough of Democrats out there kind of get it, and they need to be sane and rational to try to beat Trump. They don't need to be articulate. They don't need to be on their game. They don't need to be impressive. They just need to be less crazy than the other candidates. But, we'll see. In the national polling, we've talked a lot about it. He's held up well, surprisingly. But, Iowa poll from the Des Moines Register, highly respected outfit, everyone follows their polling really closely. He's in 5th place in Iowa, and Bernie's in 1st. And Bernie, in his Soleimani statement, Bernie didn't give an inch. He didn't say he was evil. He didn't say he was a criminal. He just said we shouldn't have done it.
So Rich, let me ask you this before we say goodbye. How do you think the jokers, and I use that term loosely, how do you think the jokers on the stage tomorrow in the Democratic debate are going to handle this whole Iran Soleimani situation?
Well, I think you'll see a division with, Biden and Buttigieg sounding more reasonable, and Klobuchar about us killing him, and then Sanders being foursquare against it and sort of leaning the Kaepernick way. This is U.S. aggression, and we have to oppose it. And Warren, and I think this is a reason she's lost a step, obviously, just being somewhere in the middle, because she came out of the gate, she was going to be a Bernie Sanders-type candidate, but then she also wants to signal her relative moderation and electability, such as it is. So like on Soleimani, and initially she calls him a murderer. The left criticizes her, and she starts calling him a high government official.
Yeah.
So if you're a Bernie person, why are you going to be tempted to go with her if you don't think you can trust her to be pure? And actually now you begin to see a breakdown of their alliance with Bernie priming his volunteers to go out and tell people that Warren, she just has rich white supporters, she can't get elected, and Warren expressing her disappointment. So that alliance that has held amazingly, for a year now, even though they're feeding off the same base of voters, that could break down, and that could be fascinating to see whether that plays out.
You know what I think would liven up the debate tomorrow night, both Bernie and Rich? I think Ricky Gervais should be the moderator.
I should introduce him.
I mean, you have him as the moderator. This will be a no holds bar debate.
That's brilliant. Consider it stolen. I'm going to tweet that right now.
Okay.
CNN, by the way, hosting it tomorrow night in Iowa, Des Moines. Rich Lowry, editor of National Review. You're brilliant, and we love having you on the Bernie and Sid Show. Thank you, Rich, very much.
Thanks, Rich.
Have a great week.
You too. On the Bernie and Sid Show with Russ Salzberg.